Hi everyone. We have another serious video today because it turns out that there have been several updates to the allegations against Neil Gaiman that we need to discuss. Some of them happened while I was in the middle of editing the last video, and some of them are quite recent, and we'll be going over all of the developments here. If you want a refresher on the details of the allegations first, I'll have some resources linked down below so you can get caught up, but without further ado, what's been going on? What updates am I talking about here? And firstly, there's a bit of an older one. There's Gaiman's response to the allegations. I shared bits and pieces of his side of the story in my original coverage when that was available in the reporting. What I wasn't able to include for time reasons was Neil's full response, which he published on his own website in January of this year, on January 14th, to be specific. I find that choice interesting, the decision to put it on his personal blog. I've covered a lot of abuse and essay allegations at this point in my career, and to my knowledge, none of the accused have ever published a statement on their personal website. Usually statements are filtered through lawyers and the media, and the subjects of those statements don't usually have the kind of internet presence where it would make sense to put something on a site directly connected to them. Regardless of the content of Neil's response, though, I have to believe the choice to do this has a purpose. It's intentional. Is he trying to get to his closest and most loyal fans first before the media? Is he avoiding public scrutiny and going to a place that he has total editorial control over? Is he angling for sympathy by using a site that will seem more intimate and real than a news article? It reads like the kind of choice an influencer would make, not a massive mainstream celebrity. And I guess that speaks to how Neil, in some ways, has straddled the line between traditional and more modern, accessible celebrity. It's the kind of thing you would do, in my opinion, as a professional internet person, if you saw more advantage in leaning into parasociality rather than making the most watertight, lawyery statement possible. But hey, I don't want to bias all of you before we've even read the dang thing, so what exactly did Neil have to say for himself? What was his response to so many women, some barely more than girls at the time of the allegations across decades, publicly saying he harmed them? In part, he said, quote, "I've always tried to be a private person and felt increasingly that social media was the wrong place to talk about important personal matters. I've now reached the point where I feel that I should say something. As I read through this latest collection of accounts, there are moments I half recognize and moments I don't. Descriptions of things that happened sitting beside things that emphatically did not happen. I'm far from a perfect person, but I've never engaged in non-consensual sexual activity with anyone, ever." I went back to read the messages I exchanged with the women around and following the occasions that have subsequently been reported as being abusive. These messages read now as they did when I received them, of two people enjoying entirely consensual sexual relationships and wanting to see one another again. At the time I was in those relationships, they seemed positive and happy on both sides. And I also realized, looking through them years later, I could have and should have done so much better. I was emotionally unavailable while being sexually available, self-focused and not as thoughtful as I could or should have been. I was obviously careless with people's hearts and feelings, and that's something that I really deeply regret. It was selfish of me. I was caught up in my own story and I ignored other people's. Like most of us, I'm learning and I'm trying to do the work needed, and I know that that's not an overnight process. I hope with the help of good people, I'll continue to grow. I understand that not everyone will believe me or even care what I say, but I'll be doing the work anyway, for myself, my family, and the people I love. I will be doing my very best to deserve their trust, as well as the trust of my readers. At the same time, as I reflect on my past, and as I re-review everything that actually happened as opposed to what is being alleged, I don't accept there was any abuse. To repeat, I have never engaged in non-consensual sexual activity with anyone. Some of the horrible stories now being told simply never happened, while others have been so distorted from what actually took place that they bear no relationship to reality. I am prepared to take responsibility for any missteps I made. I am not willing to turn my back on the truth, and I can't accept being described as someone I am not, and cannot and will not admit to doing things I didn't do. All in all, a pretty standard response to accusations of this nature, saying he's not a perfect person, but he never violated anyone's consent, while also saying he's prepared to take responsibility for any missteps he made, claiming that he's learning and growing, the usual stuff. The only thing missing is him saying this happened at a dark time for him and he doesn't recognize the kind of person he was back then anymore. It's not the kind of response likely to really sway anyone, but I doubt that's the point. Considering that he said he wanted to deserve the trust of his readers, this is more about giving his fans wiggle room to buy his books and support him, I imagine. Maybe that's cynical of me, but if it's not that, why publish it on your author journal site, right? It's a page from the same playbook a dozen other celebrities in the same position as him have used before, and it often works. But beyond that, though, there was one part of this in particular that really stuck out to me. The missteps part. How can you categorically deny any abuse or consent issues took place while also saying you believe you made mistakes? What mistakes? What missteps? What counts as a misstep here? His supposed emotional unavailability? We learn from some of the other allegations that he allegedly admitted that he wronged at least one of the women, and I'm cautious here because this is frequently the kind of language an abuser will use to soften what they've done to themselves as well as others. You see, they didn't hurt you on purpose. They didn't mean to make you have sex with them. They just oopsie-doopsied their way into inadvertently making you feel like you had to give in to all of their demands or else. I mean, haven't we all subjected a partner to such extensive emotional manipulation that they felt they could never really say no? It's a mistake anyone can make, right? His sarcasm aside, though, it is worth paying attention to what people claim are mistakes or errors in judgment or whatever minimizing language they choose. Because, as we discussed last time, abuse may not always be a conscious, mustache-twirling villain choice, but it's not a mistake either. A mistake is forgetting to pick up the chocolate your wife likes at the store after you said you would, not having a clear pattern of pursuing fans and women half your age for sexual relationships. It may not come from a place of like, these stupid 18-year-olds are falling for my trap. I can't wait to violate them. But it's definitely not something you just walk into on accident for decades, over and over and over and over again. And this connects to something else. I am shocked that he doesn't deny any of these relationships existed. That's normally move number one. But at least as I'm reading it here, he seems to imply that they all did have the relationships that are in these allegations. Just that they were consensual, like at bare minimum. He's not saying it exactly, but he is kind of admitting that, yeah, I dated all these women who were also often young fans of me, but that's not really a problem because I didn't literally physically force myself on them. Like, no, dude, it is still actually a problem. Not as big of a problem, but definitely still a problem. Like, why do you want to have such large gaps in age and experience and power in your relationships? If you want to work on something, maybe investigate that. And if I'm reading between the lines here, where he says, I can't accept being described as someone I'm not, that reflects a belief in the idea that abuse and mistreatment must always be intentional. As I discussed a lot in the last video, abusers don't always recognize themselves as the bad guy, the villain, the monster. In fact, they're often abusive because their egos are so weak that they can't ever be seen as being bad for any reason. Anything that doesn't match their self-image is summarily rejected. It doesn't mean that it's not true. The truth is more nuanced than that. But Gaiman sincerely believing in his own innocence wouldn't shock me for this reason. Some people are simply unable to psychologically accept when they have harmed someone else. No matter what evidence is present, they will do whatever gymnastics they have to avoid feeling that way about themselves and changing their self-image. And if you will allow me to stay on the soapbox just a little bit longer, I have one more bone to pick. And that is the vagueness of simply implying that he's going to be growing and working on himself. Okay, he's famous. He doesn't have to give us his therapist address or the dates he's going to be at the Celebrity Sex Addiction Treatment Center. But one of the things that separates a good apology from a bad apology is a specific plan of action people can use as an external marker of progress. You want to prove you're doing the work, whatever that means? You need to be publicly accountable. Don't give us illusions to doing the work. Say, this is my plan. This is exactly what I want to change and why. Here's how I'm going to be doing it. This is the behavior that you will be able to see change when I am succeeding. I don't know. I clearly have a problem with dating women who are fans, so I'm going to quit doing public meets and greets and appearances until I finish this specific program, and also I will be permanently removing myself from Tumblr and other social media that facilitates me interacting with young fans directly because that could cause problems. That wouldn't be a perfect total solution, but it is something. People often want to soothe themselves by saying that they want to be different while not offering any ways for people to hold them accountable for actually becoming different. This makes it extremely easy just to go back to old habits the second a bright-ass spotlight isn't on them 24/7 anymore. This is something we deal with in the kink scene all the time. People will claim, okay, I did something bad to 10 people, but it was all a mistake, and I promise I'm going to be better. I'm going to take some time away to reflect and grow and learn. And then they move cities, and 6 months later, they pop back up, and they're doing the same stuff again, maybe with a thicker veneer over the bad behavior, so it's a bit harder to spot right away this time. And it's also so they have the cognitive ability to delude themselves into believing they've changed because, now they use a negotiation form so that they could go wrong, when all they've actually done is the relationship equivalent of smushing the vegetables around on their plate with their fork and moving the carrots around to make it seem as though they've eaten their vegetables when really they haven't. It's performativity at its finest. As the saying goes, when someone shows you who they are, believe them. Look at their actions, not just their words. And Neil Gaiman, author extraordinaire, can cobble together some very pretty words when needed. If he does end up changing, great. I have no idea how we're supposed to measure that change as a member of the public, but in the interim, it's wise to be critical because of how often people promise to change only to turn around to do more of the same. Look at the House of Cataphor situation, right? That guy was in jail, and the second he had an opportunity, he started allegedly grooming a minor, bold as brass. Yeah, this is why we gotta be careful. And it turns out, a cute little blog post is not enough to quell the storm surrounding Neil, and it did not put the story to rest. Far from it. At the beginning of February, Gaiman and Palmer were hit with several lawsuits from one of the women who had previously accused him of misconduct. That woman was Scarlett, who filed a rape and human trafficking complaint against Gaiman. Scarlett was the one who alleged Neil assaulted her in a bathtub very soon after their first meeting in New Zealand, and additionally went on to violate her numerous times via, among other things, forcing her to consume her own excrements. Neil claimed in response that she had been suffering from false memories and that their relationship was fully consensual. Scarlett also filed additional lawsuits in 2 states against Amanda Palmer, alleging that she also perpetuated human trafficking, conspiracy to commit trafficking, and negligence against her. The double filing is about where Palmer resides, and the lawsuit will ultimately only continue, if it does, in one of those states and do not represent separate accusations. The details reflected in the facts section of the case also shed new light on what Scarlett may have experienced in her interactions with Gaiman. For example, during their first meeting, she was supposed to be there to babysit his child, only for Gaiman to change plans at the last minute, dropping the kid off at a friend's house so they would be alone. What was supposed to be a movie date night between Gaiman and Palmer then became a private quasi-date night between Gaiman and Scarlett, making their whole first meeting nothing but seemingly ruse after ruse after ruse. He also choked her with a belt on at least one occasion, and most horrifying of all, Gaiman seems to have exposed his child to much more than we previously knew about. Content warning here, because I'm about to share some pretty nasty details. So, beyond penetrating Scarlett while he was in the room with his child, he allegedly also went to the bathroom and forced Scarlett to consume his urine once he returned, and then he went to the bathroom again with the door open this time and had Scarlett come in and perform oral sex on him. It's not explicitly stated that the child saw all of this, but based on the fact they weren't trying to hide any of the behavior and that this was also in a hotel room where the child would have had nowhere else to go, one can make some pretty disturbing inferences there. Like, just disgusting. Absolutely vile, if that's what happened. Just, yeah. But there wasn't a large immediate response to this filing, though, so I decided to wait to see what Gaiman and Palmer would say before making this video. And just a couple of days ago, as I'm writing this, Gaiman has asked for the lawsuit to be dismissed based on the grounds that it should be filed in New Zealand rather than in the US. His response included a 40-page motion to dismiss, a statement, and a 44-page collection of text messages between him and Scarlett. Obviously, I am not about to read you all 84 pages of text, so if you want to see everything in them for yourself, articles with links to these documents will be provided below. Instead, I'm just going to be highlighting what I think are the most relevant pieces of this to the best of my ability. Neil Gaiman has unsurprisingly retained superstar law firm Burke Brettler, LLP, and if that name is familiar to you, it's because they've represented the likes of Prince Andrew, Danny Masterson, Armie Hammer, Bill Cosby, Johnny Depp at one point, and, of all people, the streamer Destiny. Wonder what's going on with that collection of people. In any case, the response primarily alleges that the relationship between Gaiman and Scarlett was completely consensual and totally above board. Interestingly, the lawsuit claims that they never had any kind of penetrative sex, and that the stories Scarlett told about Gaiman are just that, stories. And they're so outrageous because they're made up. And I'm not sure what kind of brain you'd have to make up a story about getting anally raped to the point that you bleed and or are forced to consume your own excrement, but okay. I guess something can't be assault if the story about it seems too wild. Like, that makes sense, because assault only happens in missionary with lube and condoms and the lights on. Yeah, sure. Moving on, though, his version of the bathtub incident is that it was clearly an invitation for him to bathe with her from the start, and that he never penetrated her in any way, consensually or otherwise. Much of the rest of the document revolves around shortened versions of the text messages provided in full elsewhere. One that really struck me is Neil telling Scarlett that he wanted to off himself after Amanda told him that Scarlett was planning to Me Too him, and this is somehow used as evidence that he never really assaulted her because she then tries to soothe him and tell him that she would never do that. It's a well-known fact that it can take survivors many years to come to terms with the fact that what they experienced was traumatic and violating. It is not surprising to me in the least that a person with a history of mental health issues in the midst of a housing crisis with no money to her name, who had previously also had their consent violated on at least one occasion, would not say directly to their new abuser, like a month or two out, "Yeah, you idiot, you abused me, and I hope you do." Like, what expectations of humanity do we have here? This is not how empathetic people work. Another detail here that's revealed in the expanded text messages is that this is also partly the result of a game of telephone, with Scarlett's friend M communicating with Amanda, who then told Gaiman. Scarlett may have felt more comfortable telling M the truth rather than her alleged abuser directly, or M may have picked up on cues from her best friend that she felt violated without Scarlett directly claiming as such. It may have also been part of Scarlett's and M's conversations that if Gaiman confronted her about this, she could deflect and refuse to say where M was getting that idea from for Scarlett's own safety. From the later text messages, it seems most likely that she confided in M about what happened, and M picked up that what happened wasn't okay. Knowing how complex accepting the reality of abuse can be, I don't think this was the gotcha Gaiman's legal team wished it was. We need to see contemporaneous texts with friends and treatment notes from mental health professionals and the like before we claim that we know exactly what was happening here. I mean, for starters, it is possible to be in love with someone and be abused by them. It is possible to have a friendly relationship with someone and be abused by them. Having pleasant chats or saying wishing you well doesn't mean something untoward didn't happen. If nothing else, could you imagine the weight that would be on Scarlett if such a famous author himself because of what she had to say about him in public? The fear that that might cause. There's a reason why suicide threats can be part of a system of coercive control, because a lot of times they work really dang well. And then there are these parts of the text where Gaiman says, "She, Amanda, told me not to text you, as it would only make it worse. I am so glad that you messaged me. I thought you were a monster." In M's letter to Amanda, "I anally rape you so hard you pass out," and lots of other weird stuff, and sounds pretty monstery. I mean, I don't know, there's something in there that I find compelling, like Neil's fixation with monsters and being seen as a monster and seeing other people as monsters. Maybe someone who's read more of his work can give me insight there if there's a connection to the way that he writes or how he tells stories. I get a feeling from reading these things that there is a separation that happens in his head, of black and white thinking, that you're either a good person or you're a monster. And if you're a monster, you are universally always bad. So if you see yourself as a good person, you can't really be a monster. That just doesn't make any sense. Recall, too, that Amanda allegedly told Neil from the start that he couldn't have Scarlett. And she seemingly set up a communication boundary with Neil around Scarlett that he violated here once again. Like, I wonder why Amanda would think that this could make things worse if they talked. Like, if all this is false, why was Amanda, his partner, so quick to believe secondhand testimony from a friend? Maybe it rhymed with something that she'd already heard or seen in Neil's behavior with other women, something that was alleged in Scarlett's original lawsuit. And not to do his lawyer's work for him, but if anything in any of these texts could be interpreted as a smoking gun in Neil's favor, it would be the bit about how the letter contained a lot of weird stuff. Neil was very circumspect in his previous text communication, almost pathologically so, never including a word from his perspective about their sexual relationship. So we don't know what happened or didn't based on that alone, but this phrase gives the impression he doesn't recognize what happened at all in those stories. Scarlett, for her part though, never replies to say, "Oh, I never passed out or bled. What are they talking about?" She only repeats that it was consensual, which could be read as a tacit admission that passing out did take place, just that it was okay. I mean, it is possible to negotiate a relationship where you are playing to graying out or passing out, sure, but it's negotiated, starting from a place of equality, and we have no evidence such a negotiation took place. Neither of them mentions it. Maybe Neil interpreted her passing out as merely falling asleep post-coitally. Maybe he thought that was cool for some reason. Maybe she passed out after he left her alone. It's hard to say, but I don't think this line means the stories are obviously made up simply because Neil remembers the situation differently. The "but I'm a good person" blinders can be incredibly, impossibly thick after all, and cause some pretty major distortions. Much of the rest of the lawsuit argues that New Zealand should be the venue through which the complaints are resolved, and I've covered the meat of what is in the text messages, so I next want to discuss the declaration that Gaiman filed separately from the motion to dismiss. It's a bit shorter, about 4 pages, and only the following sections are really relevant to what I want to discuss. So, quote, 8. None of Pavlovich's claims are true. She is a fantasist who has fabricated a tale of abuse against me and Miss Palmer. Although false, the alleged conduct claimed and described in the complaint all supposedly occurred in New Zealand. 9. The messages, included in the motion to dismiss, which are true and accurate copies kept by me, demonstrate, in Pavlovich's own words, that our relationship was consensual and that Pavlovich was an enthusiastic participant who initiated many of our sexual encounters. They also clearly show that outside influencers who may be called as witnesses pushed a false narrative of sexual assault against Pavlovich's wishes. This seems to summarize the legal approach Neil's team is likely to take going forward. The abuse didn't happen. In fact, they never had penetrative sex, and she's making everything up, and also someone else was influencing her or pushing a false narrative on her behalf. It may be worth saying, because I haven't said this before, but you can initiate sexual contact with someone after they assault you. You can initiate a sex act with someone, only for them to violate you during the experience by doing something you didn't consent to. If I say, "Hey, I want to make out with you," and then you proceed to stick your fingers random places without checking in first, that's assault. And this is an area of assault that can be very sticky for people because it doesn't make sense to people why you might continue to go back to someone who assaulted you. And I think in some survivors' desire to understand or reframe what happened to them, they keep going back because they're trying to make sense of what happened to them. They're trying to go back to, okay, I'm experiencing this. What is going on? They're almost trying to override the assault taking place. They're trying to understand what happened better. So it doesn't really fit nice and neatly into the narrative of a perfect victim, or that obviously the second somebody assaults you, you're never going to talk to them ever again. You're going to run away and block them on everything. There's a reason why people stay stuck in abusive relationships for months and years after the assaults start. And it's not just the second something bad happens, people run away. It's more complicated than that. And then there's Neil adding the detail to the Bath story that Scarlett said she preferred older partners and or might be open to a sexual relationship with him. That seems like a red herring to me. Like, what about preferring older partners means you can't be assaulted by this person? What about being open to a sexual relationship of some kind implies universal consent? One thing that seems clear to me, though, is that Gaiman seemingly had no specific, comprehensive consent conversations with Scarlett. If he could have proven this, he would have included it from the start of his response. He never checks in with her in the text messages he provides, either before or after. There's no record of them discussing boundaries, aftercare, safe words, or anything of the sort. Vibes-based consent doesn't really work, and it certainly doesn't work with someone you met hours ago who is half your age and working for you. This is exactly why things like the Fries model exist, because merely perceiving enthusiasm from a partner or not hearing a no doesn't give a complete picture. Consent also has to be freely given, revocable, informed, and specific as well. And when an otherwise homeless, carless, penniless 20-something is trapped on a literal island with you during the COVID-19 pandemic with you, a celebrity, that is not a circumstance in which saying a no is easy. And freely given is going to be a really hard bar to pass. Never mind revocable or informed for that matter. Plus, enthusiasm after the fact is not equivalent to enthusiasm up front or before things happen. Enthusiasm has to come first in the order of operations there for it to mean anything relevant to consent, because pleasure, desire, having an orgasm are not synonymous with consent. And if anything, the pattern in the text messages that I saw showed that Neil was consistently totally reluctant to engage in any kind of sexual conversation in any recorded format. He would leave her in bed for days and showed very little emotional investment in their connection. They were together on an island, so much of their talking probably happened in person, but still, it distinctly shifts after he thinks she might Me Too him. Suddenly offering to provide for her financially, sending her chocolates, things like that. Before that point, he comes off as distant, even cold, and by his own admission, he was sexually but not emotionally available. Having sexual contact with someone only to emotionally ice them out under false pretenses can be a form of manipulation, even if not intentionally weaponized for that purpose. The whole situation makes me frustrated because all of this totally erases any nuance around how survivors may talk about or process what happened to them. Just showing text where she's basically like, oh gosh, Neil, I don't want you to, I've never Me Too you, please don't, everything was fine. That doesn't mean much when it could easily be placation or a fawn response because, it's a direct conversation with a person who allegedly assaulted you when you were desperately in need of being paid by them. And this section of the text messages, which are ignored by Gaiman's team, validate that part of Scarlett's story. It's very clear that she is struggling to make ends meet, bounced around a lot, and had nowhere else to go. At absolute bare ground floor minimum, taking advantage of that is wrong. As a millionaire celebrity, it is unconscionable to pluck an all but homeless, mentally unwell young adult off of the streets, offer them a job on an island, only to then within hours of meeting them for the first time. That alone is a clear-cut case of taking advantage of someone. I'm a D-tier YouTuber, and even I have a boundary around not dating fans or people whose ability to consent may be significantly impaired. I don't know why this is something that other influencers and celebrities just don't understand, but don't use your fandom as a dating pool. There are other people in the world who will like you who are not fans and or are not people in desperate need of your financial assistance. And none of this disproves Neil's seeming tendency to pursue power and age gap relationships, especially with fans. Even if Scarlett somehow was suffering from a break with reality and totally imagined all these horrific assaults and they didn't actually happen, that should be enough for anyone in the public to be skeptical of Gaiman's character, because why are you pursuing a sexual relationship of any kind under those circumstances? Your dick is not going to make their life better. I'm sorry. And again, like I was saying, this is a pattern we have seen time and time again, that celebrities and influencers alike just seem to take their power, and when they have an ounce of it, they will start to pursue people, not people who are equal, not people who are also in the same industry as them, but people who are young, who are fans, who are disadvantaged, who need them in a way that makes it functionally impossible to have a healthy consensual relationship with them. And there is one point that I want to be very clear about here at the end of the video, because it was something that came up in my original coverage in the response to it quite a lot. And I am not saying that a 20-year-old cannot have a relationship with somebody who's 45, 55, whatever. It's not about the age. It's not about just, oh, you're too young to know what you want from a relationship. You're too stupid to know whether or not it's healthy to date someone who's that old or whatever. It's not the age. It's all of those factors put together. It's the age and the homelessness and the financial issues and the past abuse and being trapped on an island and it being during the COVID pandemic and then not having any other social connections to rely on. It's all of those things put together that make it functionally impossible for there to be a healthy relationship. And as the person with the higher level of power in that dynamic, it is up to you to walk away and say, hey, I know you like me, I know you're attracted to me, but we just can't have that kind of relationship. And I guess it really is that hard to say no to somebody who's willing to have sex with you. I guess it's that difficult. I don't know. And this situation is, it's so disturbing to me because I've been here before in the sense of coverage like this. I know where we are at in the timeline of public response because I've seen what happened with the House of Cataphor and with Armie Hammer and with Marilyn Manson and all the rest, right? And I don't think it's quite hit a lot of sort of the mainstream like T channels or commentary channels in a big way. But if coverage keeps up, I think people are really focused on Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni right now. But when that simmers down, I imagine as lawsuits here ramp up, if they do, people are going to focus on that. And I know what's going to end up happening. And we need to keep in mind that there is no perfect victim. And this is why people don't come forward. That was what I was really struck with when I was writing this, is how much this shows why people don't come forward about their assaults, about their abusive relationships, because virtually any person who has a relationship with the person who assaulted them on any level has some kind of text message or Facebook reply or voice note or something that the alleged abuser can twist into proving, see, the person liked me, they wanted it. After this supposed event took place, they were still my friend, they still talked to me, they didn't shut me out and run away, because people expect, again, like I talked about earlier, if you were really assaulted, you would immediately cut and run, block them, never talk to them again, and you would also respond tersely to tell them that they're a horrible person, even make it very abundantly clear that what they did was wrong. When in reality, most people don't do that because the person who assaulted them or abused them is scary and has power over them and could harm them if they are too directly confrontational. So they don't. So they placate. So they act nice because they don't want to let on what happened to them. People can maintain relationships with people for years after an incident, either because they haven't mentally come to terms with it individually or because they are in survival mode and they don't want to let on what happened to them, either to the people around them or to the person who abused them. They just don't say anything about it because they need to keep themselves safe first. And confronting your abuser by saying they're an abuser to their face is usually not how that's done. So as we go forward with this case, obviously we will see how things play out in the courts. I hope everyone gets their day in front of a judge to say their side of the story and have everything be evaluated in as fair a way as possible. But we need to keep in mind that abuse and consent issues are very complicated and that there is no perfect victim and that there is not a smoking gun in some text messages from one side, from one person. We're going to have to see a lot more evidence than that to really make any conclusions, especially because this is not happening in isolation. This is not just one person making a one-off allegation. This is decades of people making allegations, and this is only one that is being responded to. And seemingly, especially in Amanda's response to this, even in what's in the text messages, it certainly seems like she thinks that something is a problem with Neil's behavior, But in any case, that's all I have time for today. Thank you all so much for watching. If you want to make sure to not miss out on my future coverage, you can go ahead and subscribe. I also make videos twice a week about kink and BDSM education, as well as polyamory, LGBT plus issues, and pop culture stuff. So if you want to check that out, please do. And finally, if you want to support what I do, you can go ahead and go over to my Patreon. If you do already support me there, thank you so, so much. It means the absolute world to me. And until I see you all next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.